What if I told you that one moment, one choice, could tear your entire world apart? What if that choice was a secret you couldn't take back, one that would leave you questioning everything? My name is Elena, and this is the story of how I betrayed everything I loved, all because of a temptation I never saw coming. I always thought I could handle it. I convinced myself that the secret I was keeping was just a small part of me, something I could lock away and forget. But lately, it's been harder to breathe, harder to pretend everything is fine. Every glance from Jason, every laugh we share, feels like a countdown, ticking closer to something I can't escape. I never planned for it to go this far. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, something I could bury in the past. But secrets have a way of growing, don't they? They twist into something far more dangerous than you ever imagined. And now, I'm standing on the edge, ready to tell him the truth. The truth I've kept hidden for years. I'm not proud of what I've done. In fact, I can barely look at myself in the mirror anymore. But what choice do I have? It's eating me alive. Every day, every hour, the weight of it grows heavier, until I feel like I might collapse under its pressure. Jason deserves the truth. But can I live with the consequences of what happens next? Or have I already destroyed everything we had without even realizing it? I'm not sure. But I know one thing, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself. It was subtle at first. I didn't want to believe it. How could I? We had built a life together, a life that I had once believed was perfect. But with each passing week, something felt off. Jason, the man who had once been my everything, started to feel like a stranger in our own home. At first, it was the little things. The way his hand no longer instinctively reached for mine when we sat together. The way he would get lost in his phone during dinner, his eyes flicking back and forth between the screen and the wall, never quite meeting mine. It was as if I wasn't enough to hold his attention anymore. It didn't seem like much, just a few small signs I tried to brush off. After all, he had work, big deals to close, and dreams to chase. But even as I told myself that, a part of me started to ache. We had our routine, quiet dinners, the occasional weekend getaway, and late nights spent in front of the TV, pretending everything was fine. But the passion, the spark that once burned so brightly between us, was gone. Jason would come home late, too tired to talk, too distracted by the constant stream of work calls that followed him everywhere. He wasn't physically distant. No, he was here. But emotionally? He might as well have been a million miles away. And I began to wonder, what had happened to us? It wasn't that he wasn't trying, he was. But the effort didn't feel the same. His love was no longer a gesture, it was an obligation. He kissed me goodnight, but the warmth I used to feel was gone, replaced by something cold and distant. And then there were the nights when he'd fall asleep next to me, his back turned, his chest rising and falling in that familiar rhythm. But all I could feel was the emptiness between us. In the silence of our bed, I would lie awake, replaying the days when everything was simple and easy, before the weight of his ambition began to push us apart. I would stare at the ceiling, wondering what had changed. Had I become invisible? Was I just a part of the furniture now? I began to crave something. Something more. Something real. But the idea of asking for that from Jason, of admitting how desperately I needed him, felt like a betrayal. I was stuck in a world of my own making, loving him, missing him, but never really telling him the truth. And that's when I met him. I never planned it, never expected it. But sometimes life throws you a curveball when you least expect it. And in that moment, everything changed. The nights grew longer, and Jason's absences more frequent. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just temporary, a phase we were going through. He was working harder than ever, building his career, chasing his dreams. I understood that. But deep down, a nagging voice began to whisper, reminding me that this wasn't the life we had once imagined. The house, once filled with the hum of laughter and conversation, now echoed with an uncomfortable stillness. I would come home to an empty living room, the faint scent of his cologne still hanging in the air, and I would wait. Wait for him to come home, for him to walk through that door, for everything to feel right again. But he never did. I could feel the shift, like an invisible wall rising between us, brick by brick. The easy affection that once came so naturally, those casual touches, the gentle kisses, the way he would look at me like I was the only person in the world, began to fade. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn, a quiet unraveling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then, in the bedroom, I felt it even more. The once intimate space between us became a battlefield of silence. The passion, once fierce and electric, had turned into something mechanical. Jason's touches were soft, almost as if he was trying to comfort me, but it was all wrong. I could feel the distance in every kiss, every caress. There was no heat, no longing. Just routine. I used to love the way his hands would explore, the way he would pull me close like he couldn't get enough. But now, his touches felt distant, absent of that fire I had once cherished. It wasn't just the sex, it was everything. He was still affectionate, still kind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer desired. That I was just there, filling a role. A wife. Not a lover. I started to resent it. Resent the hollow exchanges we had in the bedroom. Resent the emptiness that seemed to stretch between us, no matter how much we tried to close the gap. And as much as I hated to admit it, I began to resent him. I hated the way he seemed oblivious to the cracks that were spreading through our marriage. But there were moments when I would look at him, really look at him, and see the man I had fallen in love with. I would catch glimpses of the warmth in his eyes, the tenderness in his smile, and for a split second, it would feel like everything was okay. But those moments were fleeting, fading too quickly to hold on to. And in the silence of our home, in the quiet of our bed, I wondered, is this how it ends? The kiss lingered on my lips long after it happened. The taste of Marcus, unexpected, intoxicating, still burned in the back of my throat, even as I stood there frozen, struggling to process what had just occurred. My mind screamed at me, telling me I was making a huge mistake, but my body? It felt alive, awakened in ways I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. I couldn't breathe properly. The air in the room was thick, charged, and every nerve in my body was on fire, yet in the pit of my stomach, a sinking feeling gnawed at me. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be him. I was married. I had a life with Jason, a life I had built with love and trust. And yet here I was, standing on the precipice of something that could destroy it all. Marcus didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, looking at me with those dark eyes, eyes that seemed to see straight through me. It wasn't pity in his gaze, it was understanding. He knew what had just happened, what he'd awakened in me. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, his voice like velvet. "I can tell how this feels." I wanted to pull away, to push him out of my mind, but I didn't. Instead, I let him stay in the space between us, the unspoken words hanging like a delicate thread, ready to snap. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. But the moment it happened, I realized something terrifying. I needed this. I wanted to run, to escape the reality I had created, but Marcus's words followed me as I walked away. His voice echoed in my mind long after I left the office that night. "I've seen the way you look at me. I know what you want. And I can give it to you." The guilt hit me harder than I expected. It was like a weight, heavy, suffocating, that I couldn't shake. I wanted to convince myself it was just a kiss, just a momentary lapse in judgment. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was something bigger. Something I couldn't ignore. The worst part? I didn't want to. I didn't want to go back to the way things were. I didn't want to go back to the emptiness, to the routine. For the first time in so long, someone had seen me. Someone had made me feel like I was worth more than just a wife who played her role. Marcus didn't care about the past or the mistakes I'd made. He was here in the present, and he was offering me something I hadn't even realized I craved. The question weighed on me every minute: what happens now? Could I let it go? Could I return to the life I knew? Or had the line I crossed already shattered everything, making it impossible to go back? The room was silent, too silent, as Jason stared at me. The flicker of candlelight from our dinner table illuminated the space between us, casting long shadows on the walls that seemed to stretch as long as the silence. I had just confessed everything, the affair, the lies, the overwhelming emptiness I had been carrying for months, and now, there was nothing. No words. Just a void. His eyes didn't speak. They just stared. And in that look, I saw something I had never expected to see: disbelief. Hurt. But mostly, exhaustion. As though he had given everything, every ounce of his trust and love, only to have it shattered in an instant. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice breaking the silence. The words felt like daggers to my heart. I had betrayed him, the man who had been nothing but loyal, kind, and patient. I wanted to reach for him to apologize, to undo the damage I had caused, but my body felt heavy, like the weight of my own guilt was holding me back. I had no excuse for what I had done. There was no defense. I had destroyed something so precious, something that once felt unbreakable. Jason's hands trembled slightly as he pushed his chair back, his face unreadable, his jaw clenched. He didn't look at me, he just stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the fridge. He grabbed a bottle of water, twisting off the cap before taking a long drink. It wasn't the actions of a man angry, but a man who had retreated into himself, trying to hold it together. "I don't know what to say, Elena," he muttered, his voice tight. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of everything was too much for him to carry. My heart ached. But it wasn't just for him, it was for me too. Because deep down, I knew I had broken something I couldn't repair. There was a tension in the air now, something I couldn't escape. Every word, every breath felt charged, and yet we both stood there, unsure of what came next. How could we go on from here? Was there even a way forward? "I should have known," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "I should have known something was wrong. But I didn't want to see it." His words cut through me like a cold wind. For so long, I had hidden the cracks in our marriage. I had thought I could manage the duality of my life, pretending everything was fine when it was anything but. But now, standing in the rubble of our once perfect life, I realized I had been fooling no one but myself. The guilt was overwhelming. I had betrayed not just Jason's trust, but also my own sense of who I was. How had I become this person, someone capable of such deceit? Someone capable of destroying everything I held dear for a fleeting moment of passion? Jason's gaze finally met mine. His eyes were tired, older somehow, like the weight of the world had fallen on him in a single night. He didn't need to say it, I could feel the shift. The man who had loved me so deeply was now a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. "You can't undo this, Elena," he said quietly, his voice distant. The words weren't angry, they were final. A statement of truth. And in those words, I knew I had lost something irreplaceable. And yet, even in the suffocating guilt, there was a part of me that was still numb. Still detached. The reality hadn't fully sunk in. How could it? How could I have possibly imagined that a single confession could change everything so completely? I watched as Jason walked toward the door, his back turned to me. He didn't look back. The silence in the room was unbearable now, louder than anything he could have said. And I was left standing there, alone, with nothing but the ruins of a life I had once thought was perfect. The consequences of my actions were only just beginning to unfold, and I had no idea how far this would go. Could we ever come back from this? Or had the last thread of trust been cut forever? All I knew for certain was this: there was no easy way out. And the next steps we took, if any, would shape everything we had left. I woke up to the same empty silence. The house was still, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. Jason was already up, his morning routine as predictable as always: coffee brewing, the hum of the newspaper being flipped through, the soft scrape of his shoes against the floor. But everything felt different now. The quiet between us had deepened, a chasm that neither of us had the words to cross. He had made his decision, one last chance for us. He didn't say it in those exact words, but I could see it in the way he looked at me when he finally spoke. "I want to try, Elena. But I need you to show me that you're willing to fix this." That should have been the relief I was desperately craving. But as I nodded in agreement, something else tugged at me. The pull wasn't just from the guilt of what I had done, but something deeper. A longing I couldn't explain. I had tried to bury it, tried to suppress it under the weight of everything I had destroyed, but there it was again, that temptation, the memory of Marcus, his touch, his words, the way he made me feel seen in ways Jason hadn't in months. I could still feel his hands on me, feel the tension and excitement that had coursed through me whenever we were together. It had been weeks since I had last seen him, weeks since I had betrayed Jason. And yet, the desire lingered. The longing in my chest wouldn't let me go, no matter how much I wanted it to. Jason's quiet determination, the promise he had made to salvage our marriage, felt like a lifeline, but that lifeline seemed to grow thinner the more I thought of Marcus. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing if I stepped too far in either direction, I would fall. And yet, the pull to reach out to Marcus was strong. I knew that reaching out to Marcus would mean betraying everything Jason was trying to rebuild between us. It would mean starting all over from the beginning, with nothing but the ashes of a marriage we both wanted to save. But could love alone heal these wounds? Could I really undo the damage, or was the damage irreversible? I didn't have an answer, not yet. Days turned into weeks, and as much as I tried to focus on Jason, on us, that gnawing sense of guilt wouldn't go away. Every time Jason smiled, every time he held me, I couldn't shake the thought of what I had done. But it wasn't just the guilt that clung to me, it was the realization that I would never be the same again. I wasn't the woman I had been before. The affair had left a mark on me, on my soul, on our marriage, and no matter how hard I tried, those scars wouldn't fade. I stood in front of the mirror one morning, staring at the reflection of the woman I had become. The woman who had destroyed everything she once believed in. Jason had given me this second chance, but could I really give him all of me again? Could I stop longing for the passion I had with Marcus, for the feeling of being wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years? I could feel my resolve breaking with every passing day. The temptation to text Marcus, to reach out just one more time, clawed at me. But deep down, I knew that whatever choice I made, I would have to live with it. There was no escaping the consequences. And in that moment, I understood. Love wasn't enough to erase the past. No amount of affection, no promise of a future together, could undo the betrayal. The affair had changed everything. But maybe, just maybe, Jason and I could still find a way to rebuild, if I was willing to face the truth, if I was willing to face the consequences of my actions. The decision was mine, but it was one I couldn't make lightly. Because no matter what happened, the past would always linger. The question was, could love really heal the scars, or was this the beginning of the end for us? If you've ever faced the consequences of your actions, or struggled with guilt and desire, I want to hear your story. Have you ever betrayed someone you loved? How did you cope with the aftermath? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I believe there's power in our stories, and I want to hear how you faced your own crossroads. If you found this story gripping, raw, and real, make sure to hit the like button. Share it with someone who might be struggling with their own choices, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life confessions. Every week, we dive deep into the complexities of human emotions, relationships, and the choices that define us. Don't miss out, because the next story might just challenge everything you thought you knew about love, temptation, and the moments that shape our lives. Turn on notifications, and join us for the next chapter. You won't want to miss it.